The old gardener, So Antonio as the neighbors called him, buried his first fish head on a Tuesday in late March, 3 days before the last frost. And by the end of that summer, his rose bushes looked like they belonged to someone else's garden. You have to understand how this started. It wasn't a YouTube tutorial or a manual from Embrapa. It was a conversation with an old Japanese man he'd met at the docks in Santos. A man who grew orchids on his balcony using fish scraps from the morning catch, and who told So Antonio that synthetic fertilizer was for people who did not understand how soil actually breathes. You have probably heard the claim by now. Bury a fish head under your roses and watch them explode. It sounds like a folk tale, the kind of thing your grandmother's grandmother did because nobody had invented chemical salts yet. But here is the problem. The first time So Antonio tried it, he buried the head directly under the main stem, about 6 inches deep. And for the first 2 months, that rose bush did nothing. It sat there, leaves turning pale yellow, stems soft, as if the fish had poisoned the soil instead of feeding it. That is the moment most people give up. They dig up the rotten remains, curse the neighbor who recommended it, and go back to the blue granules from the garden center. But So Antonio did not give up. He noticed something strange. The soil around the buried fish had turned dark, almost black, and when he pressed his finger into it, it felt warm. Warm soil in late spring, 12 inches down. That warmth was not magic. It was the microbial combustion engine of decomposition running at full speed, and it was consuming every bit of available nitrogen just to break the fish down. If that warmth caught your attention the way it caught So Antonio's, you already know the feeling of being one experiment away from a breakthrough. Subscribe to this channel so you catch every hidden mechanism the experts skip. Each one turns a kitchen scrap into forensic evidence for your soil. And let me know in the comments, what was the first sign that told you your garden was running on more than just water and sun? Drop your clue below, because that observation might be the key to the next layer. This is the part most people miss. When you bury a fish without knowing what you're doing, the decomposition process goes anaerobic. That means no oxygen reaches the bacteria doing the work, so they switch to a different metabolic pathway, one that produces foul-smelling compounds, locks up soil nitrogen, and creates heat that can literally cook young roots. The study from the Universidad Federal de Viçosa puts it plainly. Whole fish buried directly under a plant produce inferior results compared to plain soil for the first 60 days. The plant starves while the microbes feast. But here is where the story flips. So Antonio, being stubborn, decided to repeat the experiment with a single change. He dug a hole 18 inches deep, 1 full foot away from the trunk of his second rose bush, placed the fish head at the bottom, covered it with a layer of dry coffee grounds and crushed eggshells, then filled the hole back with soil. He marked the spot with a wooden stake and waited 60 days. Nothing visible above ground. Then, on day 63, the first new cane emerged, thick as his thumb, dark green, covered in thorns that looked like they could pierce leather. By the time 3 months passed, that rose bush had tripled in height. Every single cane carried clusters of bloom so heavy they bent toward the ground, and the petals were a deep crimson that held their color for 2 weeks instead of the usual 4 days. The neighbors' roses, fed with the expensive organic slow-release pellets, looked pale and leggy in comparison. So Antonio knew then that the old Japanese man had not lied. He had simply omitted the conditions. If this sounds like a specific memory to you, stay with me, because the details matter. The fish head he used was from a sea bream, roughly the size of his palm. with the gills still attached. He did not chop it. He did not blend it. He placed it whole. Because the indigenous peoples who originally developed this technique understood that slow decomposition feeds the soil for months, not days. The gills and the bones contain calcium and phosphorus that release gradually, feeding the mycorrhizal fungi that wrap around the roots and deliver trace minerals in exchange for sugars. Now, you know that moment when you open a bag of synthetic fertilizer and smell that sharp chemical bite, and a voice in your head whispers that you are putting something wrong into the ground that feeds your family. That is the same voice Seu Antonio ignored for 40 years. The data from the Empresa de Pesquisa Agropecuaria y Extensión Rural de Santa Catarina shows that fish-based soil amendments produce a more diverse microbial population than any synthetic alternative within a single growing season. The microbes matter because they are the ones that convert insoluble nutrients into forms the roots can actually drink. But here is the trap. The same experiment that proved the 2-month lag also showed that if you bury the fish too shallow, say 6 inches or less, the smell draws every opossum, raccoon, and stray cat within 3 blocks. Seu Antonio learned this the hard way. He woke up one morning to find a hole dug where he had planted his best dahlia. The fish head gone, the soil scattered across the lawn, and the plant snapped at the base. The 12-inch rule is not a suggestion. It is a physical boundary between a working technique and a midnight buffet for scavengers. Some people hear this and think it is too much effort. Digging a hole 18 inches deep, mixing layers, waiting 60 days for visible results. But you are not that person. You already know the difference between a quick hit of liquid feed and a soil system that builds itself over time. You have felt the frustration of watching your seedlings curl up and die despite following every instruction on the bottle, wondering if the experts are hiding something. Seu Antonio took it further. On his 3rd attempt, he added a layer of cardboard at the bottom of the hole, then the fish, then a thick layer of dried banana peels, then the coffee grounds, and finally, soil. The cardboard, he reasoned, would hold moisture and keep the decomposition slow and aerobic. The banana peels would add potassium for the blooms. The coffee grounds would feed the acid-loving microbes. He was essentially building a layered kitchen scrap battery underground. The rose bush that received this layered treatment did something the others did not. It produced a second flush of blooms in early October, long after the first flush had faded, when the weather had turned dry and the nights cool. The flowers were smaller, but they lasted 3 weeks.
12, 14, 15,
Seu Antonio
17,
counted
18,
23
19,
blooms
20,
on a single
23.
bush that had produced 7 the year before. That is not luck. That is a metabolic cascade underground that the university studies confirm takes about 90 days to reach peak output. When you consider the physics of it, the fish head is not really feeding the plant directly. The fish feeds the bacteria. The bacteria feed the fungi. The fungi trade the nutrients to the roots for carbon. It is a currency exchange that happens entirely out of sight, and the exchange rate depends on how much oxygen and moisture you provide in the initial setup. This is why burying the fish in summer fails. Heat speeds up decomposition to the point where the bacteria outpace the fungi. The system goes anaerobic again, and you get the smell and the stunting all over again. At what point in this story did you realize you have been burying kitchen scraps wrong your whole life? Did you recognize the moment when you dug up a slimy, smelly mess under your tomato plant and swore never to try that method again? You are not alone. Every urban gardener I know has made this exact
Just need
mistake.
to break it up. I don't know, it's
The
too
difference
dry.
between you
Come on,
and
let's just
someone
try.
who gives up
Together.
is whether you dig deeper and try again with the corrections. That moment of recognition when you realize the smelly mess was actually a clue. is the kind of insight that separates a casual gardener from someone who builds soil that outlasts the season. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the hidden warning signs that most tutorials skip. We read the studies so you don't have to. And right now, drop in the comments the exact kitchen scrap that gave you your worst failure. Was it a whole fish? Coffee grounds? Something stranger? Share it, because that failure is the first piece of the next breakthrough. The next step was the one that sealed the method for Seo Antonio. He took a fish head, buried it at 18 inches, a foot from the trunk, and then covered the soil surface with a thick layer of wood chip mulch. Not bark, not decorative gravel. Wood chips, because they slowly break down and feed the same fungal network that the fish is trying to build. The mulch held moisture, kept the soil temperature stable, and most importantly, blocked the scent from reaching the surface. Vermin never dug it up again. By the end of that second summer, Seo Antonio had converted his entire rose bed to the fish head method. Each bush got one head in early spring, one more in late fall. The soil changed texture. It went from hard gray clay that cracked in the dry season to a dark, crumbly loam that smelled like wet forest floor after rain. Earthworms appeared where there had been none. The soil temperature, measured with a probe at 6 inches, stayed 3 degrees warmer than the neighbor's soil through the winter, meaning the root systems never went fully dormant. Here's where most people quit again. They try the method once, do not see instant results, and decide it is another internet myth. But the study from the YouTube experiment I mentioned earlier measured the performance lag at exactly 67 days before the treated plants overtook the control. That means you have to wait over 2 months before you see any sign that it worked. 2 months of looking at a plant that looks worse than before. That is not a failure. That is the mechanism working exactly as designed. Now imagine your rose bed 3 months from now, standing tall under that humid morning sun, the soil beneath it teeming with microbes that the fish had activated. The earthworms still carrying decomposed matter deeper into the root zone. The blooms will be larger, the stems thicker, the color deeper, and the neighborhood will start asking what you are doing differently. Seo Antonio's secret is not the fish. It is the patience to dig deep enough, wait long enough, and trust that the invisible underground economy is trading on your behalf. In the next video, we are going deeper into what happens when you combine this fish head technique with a specific waste product from your kitchen that most people flush down the drain. The result will change how you think about soil preparation forever. But for now, look at your weakest rose bush. Tomorrow morning, before the sun climbs too high, dig a hole 18 inches deep, 1 foot from the trunk, and give it what your grandmother's grandmother knew all along. The old gardener did not guess. He tested, failed, adjusted, and tested again. That is the only method that ever worked. 67 days is a long time to trust something you cannot see. And that trust is exactly what separates the gardeners who inherit the soil from those who only rent it. Subscribe now to become part of the community that tests, fails, adjusts, and shares the real numbers. No fluff, no shortcuts, just what the studies and the stubborn old gardeners proved. And before you close this tab, type into the comments the longest you have ever waited for a gardening experiment to pay off. Was it 3 weeks, 3 months, a full season? Write it down, because the answer tells you exactly how deep you are willing to dig.
Don't tell
Know
me you're getting
exactly
tired
what
of
you
gardening.
sacrifice when the
Me?
gardener next door
Never.
asks how you
Just
feed
taking
your
a break.
roses and you say nothing special, while your hands carry the scent of fish gills and dark soil. There is no shortcut long enough to skip the underground transaction. The fish head does not speak. It does not flash. It digests silently for weeks, while you water and wait and wonder if the hole you dug was deep enough. That silence is part of the technique. The old gardener knew that a plant that struggles before it thrives builds deeper roots than one that never fought at all. So Antonio's final bush, the one he planted with the fish head, the cardboard, the banana peels, and the coffee grounds in a single layered pit, outlived him by 4 seasons. The neighbor who bought the house after he passed found roses blooming in February in the wrong month, in soil that smelled like riverbank. She never knew why. She just thought the house had lucky dirt. You know better now. The luck was 1.5 inches of crushed shell and a sea bream buried before the last frost, and the willingness to wait while the world above ground showed nothing at all.